Hello, hello. Today we're stepping out of the white cube and into the open air. My guest is Sarah Carrington, director of The Line, London's public art walk, a free outdoor sculpture trail that follows the waterways of East London between Stratford and Greenwich. If you've ever stumbled across a sculpture beside a canal or paused under a bridge to find an artwork suspended above you, you already understand the quiet magic of what The Line does. Sarah joined in 2019 and became director in 2025. With more than 2 decades across curating, public art and cultural strategy, her work centres on one idea. The art shouldn't be something people feel intimidated to enter, but something they encounter on their own terms, in their own neighbourhoods. In this conversation, we get into what it actually takes to bring ambitious public artworks into being, how commissions evolve over years, and how artists can begin building relationships with organisations like The Line. Sarah and I are doing something special together. On Monday the 13th of July in 2026, we're hosting a membership event in East London. Sarah will give us a candid introduction to how The Line really works, the curatorial remit, how artists are selected, the commissioning process, before we walk a section of the trail together. We're going to be joined by curators, gallerists, press, marketing and fundraising experts from our membership network, alongside previous podcast guests and artists connected to The Line. We're going to start with coffee, we're going to finish with pizza together. It's going to be a brilliant opportunity to learn from and inspire each other. Spaces are limited, so don't miss out. Please come and join us for a day, and we'll remind you that your work makes a difference to the world. Click the link in the show notes or head to kerryhand.com/membership now to grab yours before they sell out. For now, let me introduce you to Sarah Carrington. Welcome to the Extraordinary Creatives podcast. So great to have you with us. Would you do our listeners the honour of introducing yourself and say a little bit about what you do in your own words?
I'm Sarah Carrington. I'm director of The Line. And The Line is a public art trail in East London connecting Greenwich to Stratford. And we celebrated our 10th anniversary last year, and we bring artworks that were previously hidden in storage, or we commission new artworks by artists to really connect people to place and democratise access to art.
Fabulous. So could you perhaps bring that alive for us a little bit and describe a recent project that we can visualise in our mind's eye?
Yeah, at the end of last year, so in September last year, we launched a new commission by Rashid Areen. And this was a sculptural commission, which is now installed on The Line, just close to Bromley by Bow. Highly recommend everybody going to have a look at it. And alongside the sculptural commission, we also were able to present a reading room, which is something that Rashid's realised in a number of different locations, which is where he brings together his publications and things like early copies of Third Text, which is a journal that he established. So it kind of gives people an access point to his broader practice as an activist and somebody that's kind of fought against institutions of art to fight for visibility for artists from, the global south, essentially. And it was really exciting for us to know that as well as people connecting with his work through visiting his sculpture, there was an opportunity for them to learn more about that aspect of his practice. And our youth guides, we have a program with young people, they received a kind of induction training from his studio and were able to kind of talk to the public about the publications. And so they had an entry point to his work, and he turned 90 in 2025. So to have that intergenerational connection was super exciting for him, and it meant a huge amount for us to know that there was this broader connection to his work. And it was also building on a performance of disco sailing that we staged on The Line in 2024, which was a water-based performance that he'd never before seen realised, and he actually came up with the idea in the 70s. So it's what is exciting, I think, for me around that was that, Rashid's somebody that's kind of a legend, really, of British minimalism, very much still unsung in many ways, and to connect his work to audiences in East London in a very site-specific, tangible way was very powerful. And that's really what he believes, that his art comes alive when it's experienced, when audiences connect with it. And I think that's kind of also the principle of The Line, that, you're bringing people to connect with art in a way that's kind of on their terms, that they're finding their own path there. Obviously, we do an awful lot to encourage them to find their path, but it's also about that point of connection that's not you're not having to step through entrance to a building to overcome a kind of potentially perceived intimidation of entering an institution. It's actually about something that you discover in your neighbourhood, and that it's you realising that creativity can take lots of different forms. And Rashid also was an engineer originally, so we did a whole series of workshops for local secondary schools with Arup, looking at kind of engineering in relation to art and creativity. And so, yeah, another pathway in. So that's something we do an awful lot, is thinking about new pathways.
It's great to get a sense of what the line does and how you expand artists' work in so many ways, more than just the commissioning part of it, but that's sort of the layers that you unfold. And I'm curious, Sarah, there's kind of what the line as an organisation does and how and why it might be interesting to the organisation and the team. What personally did you connect with in Rashid's work? What really kind of landed for you?
I think it was that principle of connection and participation. So I remember seeing in the tanks in Tate Modern when they installed Zero to Infinity, when they first opened that new wing of the building, and the kind of purity and the simplicity of the form, but it ultimately also always being about personal connection and participation. And then also seeing Zero to Infinity in the Turbine Hall and thinking about individual connection and sort of individual agency around like actually lifting and moving these forms, and that's something that he's really excited about as well. And I think, I've always had an interest in artists and art as part of our everyday life and as part of society, and having a social function for art. That's something that I'm kind of always interested in. And I think that's a very keen principle within Rashid's practice and his work as well. So I felt that, he seemed to me to be a brilliant fit for the line, and to have that conversation around the purpose and role of art and sculpture and the potential of art to connect with people in their everyday lives. But through these, his work is also incredibly abstract and about kind of purity of geometric form, sort of going back to those principles and roots of geometry, but it being very emancipatory and about human connection as well. It's really interesting.
I'm curious about the sort of the abstraction and minimalism and how that lands outside of the institution. What kind of feedback have you had from audiences who've engaged with it so far?
I think, it's interesting. Always on the line, we're thinking very carefully about the placement of the work and the conversation it has with the context. So we've got, in many ways, quite a surprising kind of wildlife, a lot of wildlife along the lines. There's lots of plants and the waterways, and there's also lots of extraordinary architecture and heritage. And where Rashid's is cited, it's sort of in direct conversation with some quite iconic kind of bits of Victorian engineering close by. So there's 7 gas holders just on the other side of the river, which are being maintained even though the site's been completely redeveloped. And there's an extraordinary kind of railway bridge, which you could easily just walk past it and disregard it as a bit of London Victorian architecture hanging over. But actually with Rashid's form, there's kind of immediately this conversation between his kind of exquisite, isolated geometry alongside these engineered bits of the city around it. So people have definitely noted that and kind of made the connection between seeing his form as a sculptural piece and then identifying these patterns, these geometric patterns also appearing in the engineered structures close by. And I think that's, again, that idea of like finding the beauty in every day. And so people have definitely commented on that. And I think, our youth guides really loved having that connection with the work through the reading room and seeing the sculpture and that kind of dialogue between the two. I couldn't kind of quote you on audiences, in terms of what they've responded to, but I think there's kind of it's a real injection of colour in the landscape as well, and people have kind of celebrated that. And I think a lot of people I've spoken to say things like, "Oh my gosh, I've seen that. I cycle past that all the time," and knowing that it's Rashid's work, and so it's this kind of a lot of people using that route on a regular basis, and suddenly, again, for us, it's quite important people realise these are artists who show internationally that are, have an extraordinary profile and are in collections globally, and then they're then on your cycle path. That's kind of, it's like this lovely idea that a work you might be travelling to see in a museum suddenly appears on your doorstep, and that's something we've definitely had that fed back to us, this kind of enthusiasm for connecting with his work in a very available setting.
It's also something really nice about a different way of ownership, or a different way of thinking about ownership about art, right? In that you can feel very connected to a work if it's part of your daily journey and daily life, and that you've got a stake in it, right? So there's something about that. You called it democratization, but I think there's also people generally have an affinity with certain things that they see in the architecture, in the landscape, and then kind of artworks. And people's relationship to art changes when they're sort of exposed to it daily, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely can go both ways, and people might also wonder what on earth that is and how that came to be there. I remember when we worked with Rana Begum, she talked about that almost like a rupture or kind of a double take, thinking, what is that? And did I see that yesterday? And how did that come to be there? And that, I think that's so thrilling, that idea that somebody is just on their journey and suddenly come across something they weren't intending to see. Yeah, as you say, kind of can build a connection over time through their daily routines. And we've also just launched a Zineb Sadira commission on the side of the Three Mills studio in London. And Zineb was saying how she's so excited that people can see that from the tube, that it's like something these audiences connecting with her work as a kind of fleeting moment, but they might see each day, and gradually it's a text-based, it's a quote from Fellini, and that kind of connection with the language and the meaning and also what that quote means in that site can build up over time through this kind of maybe repeated connection with seeing it again and again. And again, with that piece, actually, people have said that stopped me in my tracks. I saw it and I had to stop and read it, and I had to give myself some time to take it in. And I love that idea that we're kind of surprising people.
Could you tell us what it says for the listeners so they can visualize the work?
Dreams are a language made of images. In cinema, every object and light means something, as in a dream. And that is emblazoned in kind of Hollywood style text on the side of Three Mills Studio, and then it's adjacent to the river. So as the tide rises, the letters reflect in the river, and then it's also lit at night, and the lighting of it becomes this kind of quite dramatic, almost cinematic, as though the text is kind of almost kind of like scrolling up as like credits in a film. And the text is on the side of it's one of the main studio buildings at Three Mills, where Wes Anderson and Tim Burton and all sorts of different directors have shot films historically. So she loves that. She loved that connection with thinking about the language of cinema on the side of a building where these kind of dreams are created, but also thinking about the river as a symbol for change and movement of people's own dreams, personal dreams, moving them, and that connection with community as well. So yeah, that's another piece I think that's had that kind of broader connection again with people passing by on their daily routines, and that kind of meaning gradually building up over time, as well as all the work we're doing to kind of give people information. And of course, we acknowledge lots of people are just going to pass by, or they're going to jog past it or be on a dog walk, and it's going to form its own connection for them in their lives in their own way as well. So but I was also going to add, in terms of the building ownership, we have got a model where we've co-commissioned, which is where local people have actually written the brief for the artwork. They've selected the artists. They've been involved in choosing the site. And that has definitely created a kind of a new kind of investment and connection to the whole programme, really, but specifically to those works as well, because people kind of see their own input and engagement, and they get to know the artist, they follow the process. And I think there's nothing more powerful than that, in a way, to actually meet an artist and then see the work, and to be involved in part of that process with them is I think has quite a very long lasting impact on people's connection to the work.
So with that in mind, how are commissioning decisions made? What are the key criteria that kind of determines whether a project can be commissioned by the line?
It really varies, I think, and sometimes the site comes first and sometimes the artist comes first. Often it's got to be somebody that is at the right stage in their practice to be able to take on a public commission, which has an enormous amount of complications and factors that make it relatively challenging in terms of resource and time and needing additional support around it. So often it is artists who've had some experience of working in the public realm. Equally, it can be really exciting for us to have the experience of bringing somebody's work outside who hasn't worked outside historically. So for Zineb, I think that was her first public artwork in the UK. And similarly, Rana had never worked with those forms in a public realm setting. So we had to do all sorts of testing and experimenting on those. So I don't think there isn't a kind of hard and fast rule.
The difference between an artist that might be commissioned for the line as opposed to another public site. And I know it's quite hard to, from the outside, to kind of get a sense of the flavour of the kind of artists. So there's the artist and the site. So people who have they've got some experience sometimes of being commissioned by other public art places, but I wonder if there's a flavour of artist, or it sounds like you're interested in artists who are curious about community, who want to engage with a wider public, who have something to reflect on kind of the experience of our times.
I think it's absolutely about kind of a curiosity to community, but also that can be about thinking about responding to heritage and the site and the layers that exist, in relation to the river or landscape or community history, and how these areas of London have evolved historically and the kind of power relationships that have defined that. For instance, like Larry's response to how the Royal Docks has evolved. And but equally, like someone like Larry is not a kind of public artist in that sense. He works across sound and performance and video. And
that's Larry Achimpong,
so,
right?
Larry Achimpong, sorry, yes. Mm-hmm. I think I don't know that I would say that we have like a stable of artists who all look and feel a certain way. I think that would feel quite, I think I'd feel a bit sad if that was I think it's also about kind of surprising encounters, presenting artists that provoke new questions about site, but also people talk about when they come to the line, they connect with one another and they connect with themselves in a new way. And often that's about the work also creating questions, and those questions might relate to the site, but they also might relate to the wider society, I guess. Historically, the line was founded as a loans model, and I think that meant that the works that were borrowed were things that were relatively kind of monumental in scale, that were very robust because they had to withstand the ravages of UK weather, that could, survive public interaction. So historically, I would say there's definitely kind of a scale and a materiality that was distinctively the line. But then I think things like Rana's response, which is much, she created these extraordinarily delicate mesh forms that were suspended above you. That was much more of a kind of approach of like materiality and a kind of surprising encounter with form, because they were so light and sort of almost like dreamlike, these kind of colourful clouds. And that was almost the antithesis of, say, Gary Hume or a massive Martin Creed that was, that we've had on the line historically, or Gary Hume's still there. But so I think I would hope the program's kind of evolved to encompass a broader set of practices and broader responses over time.
So if an artist wants to work with an organisation like The Line, what would you say would be the way that they would get to know you and your team? How do the team get to know artists generally?
I mean, a lot of it is people that we've got to know over quite a long period, just through seeing their work or getting to know them through connections or existing relationships. I think artists coming to our events and getting to know the team that way is always really interesting. I think we do get a lot of artists that contact us, and I can't go to every studio visit, but I do love going to be able to see artists work in their own spaces and having that kind of dialogue. And I can't promise that everybody that I see will end up into a project, but at least it kind of gives a really lovely way in and a point of encounter. I think, as well as the kind of more, I guess, monumental or substantial commissioning programs that we have, which often take a really long time to evolve, and we work with artists over a number of years. We do also work with artists as kind of key parts of our engagement program, which can be through developing creative health programs with audiences and with community groups, or helping to support on delivery of family activities or school workshops, or teachers workshops. It's very much driven by artist practice. Like, we really do want to support artists to work in that way. as well, and for it to be informed by their practice and their approach to materials or whatever it may be. So I think it's important, as much as we talk about the line artist being the sculptures you see on the route, there's many, many different ways that we work with artists through the programme, through like leading tours or facilitating and creating creative workshop programmes based on their practice as well. So kind of artist facilitators, I guess, is what I'm talking about in a broader sense. But yeah.
So let's say if perhaps you could pick an example of a recent project, and could you give us an example of how you and the team would start to plot out or develop a project for the line?
I mean, I think with the co-commission, so for instance, with Helen Kamek, who we commissioned, which launched in 2024, I think, that was through the co-commissioning model I talked about, where we invited local people to be part of a kind of co-commissioning group, effectively like a working group to come together. We leafleted the local community. We spoke to lots of local organisations to get people interested to kind of apply to join us. And then they came together. We reimbursed them to cover their time for any discussions or workshops that we hosted, so that they kind of were recognising that we valued their time and input. And they helped to identify the site. They talked about what the brief for the work should be, and then we presented them with a kind of, I think, a long list, if we called it a sort of curated long list of artists that we knew, who we'd researched or whose work we'd come across in different settings that we knew would kind of be able to take on the scale and the requirement of that project. And then from that, they selected a shortlist of 3, and those 3 were invited to bring a proposal to present to them. Each of those the shortlisted artists were paid a proposal fee to present their work, because that's something, we don't want to expect that artists are going to come up with ideas and share them and present them without acknowledging that that's taking up their time and headspace, and that needs to be covered through a fee as well. And then of the 3 that were presented to the group then selected Helen. And then Helen was appointed, and she created the commission, which is a text-based piece across the River Lee, which is on a cable bridge, which takes power to Canary Wharf. So again, it's this extraordinary bit of infrastructure. It would be very easy to miss that has now become a work by Helen. And it's the first time she'd worked with sculptural letters within her practice. So even though she's obviously always worked with text. So yeah, that is an example where we very much was shaped or guided by local people's feedback and input, but we still, as kind of, I guess, experts in a sense, we took a long list of artists to the group rather than being them bringing suggestions of artists that they thought. And I think there's a kind of a mutual understanding of that being the kind of starting point.
So then Helen would get an artist fee, and then a materials budget to develop something. And what kind of the challenges do you guys go through in terms of navigating the stakeholder relationships, from the developers to the local authorities? With that work, for example, could you give us an example of the processes that you'd have to go through to make it manifest in real life?
Yes. I mean, in some ways, Helen's was relatively straightforward because it was the organisation that owned the bridge that we liaised with directly, which is UK Power Networks. There are other sites where we're actually looking at a commission that's launching next year, and we've got a site in mind. And even when we stand there with one of the key landowners, there's still question marks over, well, I think that bit might be somebody else, and that's a different authority. And you just realise, and I find that all quite fascinating actually, that land, as much as we think is owned by the council or a developer, it's never that straightforward. There's always multiple different authorities. We have to talk to the Environment Agency quite often, or the Port of London Authority, or Canal and River Trust, all sorts of different organisations, as well as the private developers. So the line crosses 3 local authorities. The route connects 3 local authorities, and then there's roughly 20 different private developers that own various sections of the route. And so anything we do has to have a full planning application. And in order to get the planning application through, we have to liaise with multiple stakeholders and landowners to confirm that they're happy for us to submit the planning application, and to confirm that people are, being engaged in the right stages and the right processes. And then sometimes we even have to engage people like wildlife experts around the impact the work might have on birds or bats, or local ecologies, because obviously we don't want to be doing things that are going to interfere and create problems on those levels, but whilst also being able to be ambitious and take some risks, so it's always a kind of merry dance and negotiation. But the key thing is that people then come on the journey with you. And often, like with Zineb's piece, the people that run the studio were completely blown away by the outcome of that work. And, I think that often happens, that people don't know quite what they're getting involved in, and they have to have a bit of a leap of faith in us, in the artist. And that's an incredibly rewarding and exciting journey. I'm not saying it's not without its complexities and challenges, and often there are compromises on both sides. But often the outcome is something people feel is something they feel incredibly proud of and very surprised by quite often, because they just don't, as much as you can see a render of an artwork or a drawing from an artist, it's only when you actually see it and the light changes and you can actually see how it's behaving and responding in that site. Like Helen's work, the light, the sun as it travels across the river, the shadows change all through the day. So you can see the work at one point and it will look completely different on another time of day. So, and we can talk about that, but until you actually see it and experience it, then it becomes something that you've got your own connection to. And that's,
Yes. I think listeners will appreciate that. It's the same as when you send a JPEG to somebody. It's very different from seeing an artwork in real life, but there's seeing an artwork in a sort of an indoor space, and then there's seeing a work in an outdoor space. And obviously the light and the weather and the temperament and the mood that you bring to it, all of those things affect the reading of the work. I know you find the art world baffling sometimes. It is. This is exactly why I built the membership. Inside the membership, artists rebuild their confidence. They reignite their pride. They recover their sense of play and finally feel like they belong. They land studio visits, sales, shows, better fees, stronger relationships, and a genuine sense of agency. Here's how it works. You get the online membership hub on your laptop or phone and gain instant access to every live session, replay and worksheet, as well as an active community, so you're never stuck waiting for an answer again. You get weekly advice sessions with me where you can ask me anything you're stuck with, and I'm going to give you straight, honest answers. And you get coaching with me at an affordable rate. Plus, there are real-life meetups, expert webinars, monthly studio visits with members, and 4 guest artist studio visits a year where you can ask your own questions live. And the best bit? It's an affordable price every month and you can cancel anytime. So please don't keep struggling on a loan. Try it. 2 months from now, you could have answers to things that have been holding you back for years. I'm curious, is there a moment where you've personally negotiated something over the line that you were especially proud of, where there was resistance?
It's hard because there's lots of challenges that you sort of I don't want to kind of reveal too much detail, but I think, Rana's, I guess, is a good example. We worked on that all through COVID and we're trying to be very site specific whilst we couldn't actually get to the site, which was really challenging. So we had to do a lot of imagining, and Rana had some amazing ideas about like stringing bits of netting and fabric between buildings. And it's that balance of like, I really want to make this work and I want to make your dreams come true, but also having to really listen to people saying these are the issues, this is the wind, this is this is going to pull part of the building off. You just can't. Yeah. You just can't. These are the swallows whose flight path you're going to impact on, and so having to kind of allow space for experimentation. And luckily Rana's, a complete joy to work with and understood we were on a journey and didn't fix onto things so much that we couldn't find another solution. So that, I guess, was negotiation with me and with Rana, but also keeping on with the landowner to ensure, well, if it can't work there, where else can we do this, and not letting go and not giving up. I think, you just can't take no for an answer. Ultimately, I think is one of the lessons of public art commissioning. You have to keep pursuing and challenging and looking if somebody says that this can't go this deep because the foundations can't go there because of whatever, then what else can we do with the engineers? How can we make it work? How can we retain the artist's vision but still make it structurally sound and keep the landowners happy without feeling like we have to scrap the whole thing? We have had experiences where something's gone quite a long way down a route and then we've had to choose a different location for various reasons out of our control. And that's incredibly frustrating. And that's why, in a way, we're trying to leave longer now, because so that we make sure we've got enough time to really nail down all of the different aspects. But even with all the best intentions and all of that work in place, you still have the risk is you do get surprises, because we don't own the land. We can't say we can definitely put it here because it's ours, so
Yes.
we are slightly at the mercy of other factors. But I think we've also got a really strong track record now of showing what's possible and what can be done, and also the impact this work can have on people locally, and on this kind of idea of this connector, this route that brings you between these extraordinary areas of transformation in London. And I think people really want to be part of that, and there's an enormous amount of goodwill since the beginning of the line, but it continues, because people have seen the impact it's continuing to have and how it's grown.
So you've spent over 20 years now working across public arts, hospitals, strategy and socially engaged practice. What do you think is the consistent thread in terms of what you personally care about in arts?
I guess it's like I said to begin with, it's really my belief that, art and artists it has a transformative power. And, I can't remember who said it recently, but I think it was Laura Ford actually was saying that she found that art saved her, and she wanted to help other people find that this, that it's not just about seeing and viewing art, it's also about that understanding of the space that art creates for people, this the making, the process of making, what that can do. Now we know so much more about what that does to our brains and to our being and our sense of self, and also knowing how much art can kind of bring people together around different questions and ideas. And I think I've always had that interest of thinking, actually, and not in a way that it's like something I have to impart, but like people who maybe didn't think in their daily life they were going to be talking about art or connecting with it, have the opportunity to kind of get in there with my elbows and say, look, let's think about this. Let's create. Let's see what we can work on together. And that's a surprise for them. And I think I love that point of connection and that that potential it can have. I mean, I also fundamentally believe it's, in the world the way that it is, and all the challenges, the multiple challenges that people are facing, it's something there's no other space like it, and I think we have to protect it at all costs, because it does allow people to ask questions and to provoke thought and find space to ask difficult questions and to bring people together in a way that very few other things do now. And that feels really, really urgent. I guess I feel really lucky to be able to be keeping on opening up these spaces, and I want people to be part of that as much as possible, particularly like with the work we're doing with schools, to make sure that kids and young people feel that this is a space that they can enter into and that's for them, and that it isn't exclusive or limited, that they have as much a right to be part of it as everybody else. And so, again, that idea of pathways and making sure it's accessible is really important to me.
What was your route to that, Sarah? What was your ignition moment? Who or what turned you on to art?
Probably my family. My mum's an artist, and I was always taken to see things from a very early age. And I don't know if I can put my finger on exactly the sort of moment, but I think I like to be provocative in a certain sense, and it's that feeling that actually this allows me to do something that it's not, you're making your own reality in some ways through it, which is really quite amazing to think that I'm, this is like whenever we start a new work at the line, it's never been done before. Nobody's made a work, apart from when obviously it's alone and it's an existing piece, but even that's never been seen in this location before. It's completely different, it's completely new. And then, how are we going to talk about it for this context, and how are we going to, who do we want to, who locally would really connect with this, and how do we connect with them, and what do they want to see? And like all of that kind of building a new reality is really, really thrilling. And I don't know where that impetus came from, but I think even when I was studying curating, I always knew I don't just want to make work within a gallery setting. I always wanted to do something different or be outside of that and kind of almost make life harder for myself. So I guess that's always, it's like it's doing something that isn't expected. I think that ultimately that's often what art is, isn't it? It's not just replicating, it's actually asking questions and pushing boundaries. So
I like that. I'm with you on that. I also I like the ignition moment and starting things and getting things off the ground. I can really relate to. What do you think the current opportunities and challenges are for organisations and working in commissioning and public art at the moment?
Opportunities are that I think there's more interest in public sculpture than ever before. It feels like there's a huge amount of new public sculpture parks opening and different people wanting to invest and look at public art and see the value in it, because I think that's also reflecting people wanting to find new reasons to be together and to find new reasons to connect with the material world, and sculpture is kind of an amazing platform for that. I guess there's a risk then that you're going to end up with an awful lot, and just making sure that there's a kind of still this kind of emphasis on the quality of the work that's there, and ensuring that there's still that real rooted sense of place and what does this place mean historically, what does it mean to people now, where do we start from in that sense, rather than it being a kind of something that's shiny and immediate, I guess. We've set up London Sculpture Week with free sculpture in Fourth Plinth and Sculpture in the City, and it's grown annually, and there's definitely, it feels like there's a real interest in people understanding how does this work happen, what does it mean, what does it do for us. Equally, there's just a lot of people going to see work outside. I think that reflects a kind of wider need for people to connect outdoors and to have experiences and to be in the material world, which I think is what sculpture can do in such an extraordinary way. And then I think obviously challenges, I'm sure you've heard this from everybody you're interviewing, that it's a really difficult time to be fundraising. But I also think, bringing work outside, to my mind, from what the line's been able to do is to bring together all sorts of different partners together, to think about what is public space, what is this route, and how can we be a part of this journey. And so we're not kind of fundraising in the more traditional sense that institutions, and we don't have a building, we're not having to kind of keep the lights on in a building. I'm not saying there aren't things we need to fundraise for, of course there are, but we're able to be relatively flexible about who we work with and how we work with them, the different sorts of kind of networks of partners that we can bring together, because we work across lots of different areas of our program. And then we are an urban experience in some ways as well. So that, and I think, a real challenge for artists and for public art organisations is thinking, actually, now we have all these things in the world. A lot of them are very big. They are, they're hard to store. They're expensive to store. So when we're commissioning, we have to think really carefully about what is the lifespan of this work and what's it going to be afterwards, where's it going to go, who does it belong to, and equally when we're taking a loan, how long can we have it and how will this function, how do we make the most of it being here. So they're not small things that can be packed down into a nice crate and sent back to somebody. These are like significant pieces of infrastructure in some ways into the city's landscape, which is super exciting, but also presents challenges around kind of afterlife and longevity and all of that.
So if you were loaning a work, say from a commercial gallery or an artist, for example, what would be like the minimum loan term that would be required?
So we start with a 2-year loan term normally. When it's from a gallery or a collector in that way, but very often those are extended. Often it's sort of 2 years is quite helpful in order to secure planning and get the space, get everybody on board and get everyone engaged. And sometimes works are returned after 2 years, but very unusually, normally there's an extension, and often lenders are really happy to continue. But so far they've always been happy to continue them unless they've kind of been sold or recalled to go to be displayed somewhere else. But most works on loan do extend beyond the 2-year period,
And what would the benefit be for a collector loaning their work to you for that long?
I guess it's the association with a programme that's about access and people being, their work being visible. I mean, sometimes it's a benefit because they're not having to store it, they're not having to pay for storage. So we're helping with that. And also we create a lot of visibility. We create films and audio that goes onto our Bloomberg Connects app. We create different materials and interpretive materials that, bring the work into, I guess to give it a different provenance. I mean, I'm always frustrated that often public sculpture isn't listed in the same way as a gallery show. And I think that's something that would be great to kind of move beyond that, because often it is as significant in terms of profile and broadening understanding of the work. But we've also had collectors who've donated works that we then, so now we have a work by Eva Rothschild that was donated to us last year. And that's now part of, work that we effectively own. So collectors often want to actually support the line through acquiring and then donating the work to us, which is a new model.
So, given that you've talked about democracy, you've talked about access, you've talked about education and engagement, you've given us some clues, but I wonder, Sarah, what one thing would you change about the art world if you could?
I mean, the art world itself, I feel like we've got to start with improving access to education, and it's really tough what's happening in art schools and arts degrees, and the kind of the disincentivizing that's happening to students right in sort of year 7 and 8, being put off taking art subjects. Because I think you've got to start there, because without them, we're not going to even have anyone applying for art school in the first place. So that seems to me to be a real tragedy. I mean, I don't want to be kind of glib about it. I think, obviously there's terrible things happening across the kind of commercial gallery sector, and there's institutions are struggling for funding in lots of different ways. I mean, I hate to say it, but often people are incredibly resourceful in how they continue to program, because everybody that's involved in the, in arts ultimately has a kind of passion and a commitment to getting things seen and finding ways. And I'm not saying that would obviously be brilliant to have lots more funding and resourcing around that. But I think if you don't have people knowing that they want to be an artist, or even thinking about different jobs within the cultural sector, we've kind of let down a whole generation. And I've seen it with my own family. Like, I've got teenage children who went through the school system before 2014, and they had a curriculum that was infused with art and creativity, and it wasn't something that was hidden. And I've got a younger child now who's going through primary, and art, drama, music, everything has to be an extra. And I just think that we are doing a huge disservice, because it helps people to learn and to grow, even if they don't end up taking it at art school. So I think the art world itself, until we can resolve those issues, we're going to struggle anyway. So that would be my main bugbear. And I think, I'm getting kind of old and nostalgic, and I think there's something really amazing about those times of going to galleries before phones and before all of these layers of all that visual interference, how much we take in visually all day. We're constantly processing things visually, and actually that feeling of just going into a gallery and feeling like I'm going to just have space to look. I still feel it, when I go into galleries now. I'm not looking at my phone, which is great, but you're still very aware of lots of people around you being on phones, or taking a picture of the label of the work even, or taking a picture of the work to think about it. And I just think we're looking in a very different way now, which, we're evolving, humans are evolving. But I think, hark back to thinking, actually, wasn't that an amazing time that we lived through, where people just had a different kind of hunger and a need for the visual, because we weren't bombarded constantly with a digital visual intake of stuff. And that also we weren't consuming art through our phones in the way that I think a lot of people, and not that that's a bad thing. And I completely recognize that, I've definitely got to know artists' work, and I feel like I've seen exhibitions when I've seen them on my phone, which is terrible to say, but you do, I'm sometimes really thankful when you're like, oh, that's great, I've got a whole run of images of the show, that's so great. But there is something I miss about that feeling, like I've got to get to that show, and I've got to see it, and I've got to spend time with that work, because I'm not going to have any other way of contacting, or I've got to look at the book because the catalogue, is going to bring it all to life for me. And so I suppose, I'm not saying, I don't know how that would change, or what we would change about it, just get rid of phones. I mean, there's lots of reasons that would be great, but
there are indeed.
Yeah.
I think that was something I noticed at the weekend. I went to see the solo show of the artist Emma Richardson at Southampton Art Gallery, and they just had their opening weekend where Emma's amazing show kind of launched the reopening of the gallery after being closed for some time, and they'd hung a lot of the collection in the kind of open foyer areas, really open, without perspex boxes or glass cases over, just but in such a way. But the galleries were buzzing, Sarah,
Mm-hmm.
buzzing,
Mm-hmm.
and the enthusiasm from an incredible mix of people. There were families there were people doing all kinds of things, but just people really looking. And I stood in those galleries for ages before I was doing a talk with Emma. And so I thought, I just want to soak up this moment, because it's been a while since I've just hung out and enjoyed other people enjoying art in quite that way. And they were alive and asking each other. There was a young teenage couple, obviously on like early flourishing of a date, who were asking each other questions about Emma's work next to a John Martin painting, you know. I mean, it was just fabulous. And I have to say, there was something about learning with others, but without a prescription, without an agenda, if you like. I'm not saying that institutions or spaces are agendaless at all, but I'm saying it's very different from when you go through learning programs or prescribed routes through, but where you can meander and wander and look and feel your way into something. And I think it was alive with people feeling something, and that was really infectious. And it was all free. The whole thing was free, just like the line is. And I think that, as you've been talking, that's something that really comes across, that creating places and spaces for people to encounter art on their own terms without being didactic, but also giving them the jumping off points if they need them. But then the real genius, I guess, is kind of what people choose to make it mean for them, if you like, but that it always does land with people in different ways than we anticipate. So I'm with you. I think there is something in that mediated experience of art. I think there is nothing quite beats those in real life experiences. And also, I have to say, the slowing down time to experience them. And I think for me, it's not just the phone, it's the time that people pay attention.
Yeah. And actually, we've done Juma Harding-Dimmock, who's the head of engagement at the Line, talks a lot about that kind of, because we're along the water, so we kind of use the water. We have a wellbeing program, which people can be socially prescribed to come and walk the Line. And we use the water for breathing exercises and grounding. So there's kind of actual mindfulness happening. But beyond that, people talk about that in terms of connecting with the work and that pacing of walking and talking and stopping and looking at work on the line, and that people do reflect that that's a kind of a slowing down, a connecting, a grounding, and I think preserving those moments is really, really vital. So
there's also something in their coaching practice. Very often when you're training as coaches, and some of us still do this, you can choose to also be a walking coach, which was because something happens when you're walking alongside somebody. It's a bit similar to being an artist, actually, where you get into flow in a different way, and movement actually helps people access kind of some of the sort of the memories that, or the thoughts or the feelings. And when you're not confronted by either somebody sitting in front of you or what have you, something else is accessed. But walking with and being in relation to actually opens up a lot deeper reflections.
So it's also, exactly like you say, not being side by side, you're on a different level. I mean, we've had kind of groups. I remember after COVID, we had a group of psychologists from Bart's Hospital use it as a kind of team away afternoon, and they said they talked in ways along the line they would never have spoken to each other in a different setting, and it kind of opens up dialogue. And we've also had artists who talk about themselves as walking artists, and who kind of host different programs and guide walks on the Line. And our youth guides get some training around kind of creative walking practices and thinking about, I'll let you say, the kind of the thinking that happens through walking and the way we connect through walking that's very different to sitting and working together in a kind of static way. And I always remember A.S. Byatt saying that when she was writing, she'd always walk first before she started writing, and it was the rhythm of her feet that got something triggered, and that kind of started to unlock the creative process of writing. And I think we haven't really kind of looked at it as a sort of part of the program formally, but walking is very much is how you experience the Line. I think I'd love to kind of look at that more in terms of artists that use walking as well, and how we kind of create more of those spaces within the programme.
Yeah, it's especially good for teenage boys.
Oh yes. That or being in a car. More likely being in a car, to be honest.
Yes, I'm
because
sure
they like
lots of
getting
parents.
lifts.
That's right. Lots of parents listening would know that, how sometimes actually rather than being sat around a dinner table or
Absolutely.
being face to face, that actually
Yeah.
alongside. Yeah, I love that. So how can people stay connected with you and your work and the Line's work?
So we've got a very active social media on Instagram, and we've got a fantastic newsletter that goes out monthly with upcoming programming and things we've been working on, as well as things that are local to the Line. So we like to kind of highlight opportunities and things happening nearby. We have a book, which I have here.
Fabulous.
Which is available from our website. It's also sold in bookshops globally, but please do buy it from us because the proceeds support our ongoing programming. So yeah, that's a great place to kind of learn about the story and the history of the Line, but also lots of interesting perspectives in there. People like Jez Fernie and Emma DeBeery writing about what reflecting on their own experience of walking the Line and ideas of time and place and history and art outdoors. So very rich kind of text within that as well. And then we have podcasts on our website. We have an app with Bloomberg Connects, which has a lovely walking tour of the Line narrated by Bill Nighy. It has meditations on there, and it also has audio from each artist so that you can actually listen to the work from their voice, from their own perspective, and includes things like Anthony Gormley describing Quantum Cloud being installed from the river, like lovely little kind of, I love all that kind of, the tidbits, the bits behind the scenes of how these things came to being. So do listen to that when you walk the route or afterwards to kind of learn more about those works.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and reflections with us today, Sarah. Much appreciated.
Thank you for having me. Thanks so much.
There are a few things from this conversation with Sarah that have stayed with me. The first is the reminder that public art operates on a completely different timescale to most of what we make. Sarah talked about commissions evolving over years, planning across 3 local authorities and around 20 private landowners, negotiating with everyone from UK power networks to the Port of London Authority. And sometimes ecologists protecting bird and bat flight paths. It's patient, careful, deeply collaborative work. And the line I keep returning to is hers. You can't take no for an answer. You keep pursuing, keep adapting, keep finding ways to hold the artist's vision while making it structurally sound and bringing the landowners with you. The second is Sarah's belief that art belongs in everyday life, not behind intimidating doors, but encountered on a cycle path, glimpsed from the tube, stumbled across on a dog walk. Rana Begum's delicate mesh form suspended above you, Zineb Sadira's text reflecting in the river at high tide and lit at night like film credits. Rashid Arian's geometry in conversation with the Victorian gas holders across the water. Work you might otherwise have to travel to a museum to see, and there it is on your doorstep. And the third is what happens when you commission with people, not just for them. Sarah described their co-commissioning model. Local people writing the brief, choosing the site, helping select the artist, paid for their time. Helen Cammack's text-based work on a cable bridge across the River Lee came out of that process. The investment people feel in those works runs much deeper because they've been part of bringing them into being. If today's episode has sparked your curiosity about how art in the public realm actually happens, come and explore it with us in person. We're hosting our event on Monday the 13th of July, where Sarah and I are going to be together introducing you to the Line in person. Sarah's going to share the thinking and we're going to walk the Line and understand some of the stories behind the works along the route. We're going to have plenty of time to look and think properly together. You can find more kerryhand.com/membership or check out the show notes. As always, thanks for listening. Don't forget to follow so you don't miss another episode. Thanks for being here.